Eleanor Pike learned how God leads step by step when she stood at the edge of a dry irrigation canal with one boot stuck in red clay, a torn county map in her hand, a line of blue survey flags disappearing into fog, and a voice message from her daughter saying, "Mom, if you take one more step into that field without knowing where you're going, I'm calling someone." Eleanor was 66 years old, retired postal carrier, widow, keeper of spare keys, maker of terrible coffee, and the only woman in Cedar Hollow who could still remember which farm lane belonged to which family before half the town sold acreage to developers and the other half pretended progress was a weather pattern they could complain away. For 34 years, she had delivered mail through heat, ice, loose dogs, washed out roads, broken bridges, and mailboxes placed by people who apparently hated postal workers. She knew routes. She trusted routes. She believed in addresses, mile markers, turn signals, and written instructions. Then her brother Calvin died and left her the one thing she never wanted, their father's abandoned peach orchard on the far side of Miller Ridge. The orchard had been in the Pike family for 3 generations, then slowly surrendered to weeds, debt, silence, and arguments. Nobody could remember without choosing sides. Calvin's will was simple and cruel. Eleanor gets the orchard if she walks the boundary herself before selling it. She had laughed when the lawyer read it. Then she had realized Calvin was dead serious, which was inconsiderate for a dead man. The property line was old, the survey markers buried, the access road blocked, and the county map so faded it looked like it had survived a war and lost. Eleanor had planned to sell immediately. A developer already wanted the land for storage units. Simple, clean, done. But Calvin knew her. He knew she would rather sign away a place than feel what had happened there, so he made her walk it. That morning she started before sunrise with a thermos, the torn map, a compass her father once carried, and 12 blue survey flags she found in Calvin's truck. She thought she would follow the old fence line, find the corners, take a few photographs, and be home before lunch. Instead, fog rolled in thick over the field. The fence vanished into bramble. Her phone lost signal, and her boot sank into clay at the edge of the canal where water used to run when the orchard still lived. She pulled her foot free with an ugly sound and said, "Lord, I do not appreciate object lessons before breakfast." The fog swallowed the field. Somewhere ahead, a crow called like it had bad news and enjoyed delivering it. Eleanor looked at the compass. The needle trembled, settled, trembled again. In her coat pocket was a small Bible, not because she had planned devotion, but because Calvin had left it on the truck seat with a note taped to the cover. "Read Joshua. Before you decide, the land is only dirt." Eleanor had rolled her eyes so hard she nearly saw the back of her skull. Joshua, land, boundaries, courage, walls, rivers, battles. She did not need a conquest narrative. She needed a clean sale and the buyer with a cashier's check. But now, standing in fog with no signal and one wet sock, she opened the Bible, because sometimes God gets a woman's attention through inconvenience when tenderness has been ignored. The page marker was in Joshua chapter 1. "Be strong and courageous," she read aloud, her voice sounding small in the fog. "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Eleanor stared at the words. Wherever you go, not wherever you understand, not wherever the route is visible, not wherever the map is clean. Wherever you go. The peer string from Joshua, God often leads you one obedient step before he gives you a complete picture. Joshua did not receive a comfortable explanation for every battle, every delay, every fear, every grave behind him, or every unknown ahead. Moses was dead. The wilderness was behind. The Jordan was in front. The people were waiting. The promise was real, but the path still required feet. Eleanor wanted God to give her a full route before she moved. What to do with the orchard, how to forgive Calvin, whether to sell, whether to keep, whether the old family land still mattered, whether the grief she had, buried under efficiency, would finally come up like roots. But Joshua begins with a command to arise and cross, not because Joshua was fearless, because God was with him. Eleanor folded the map, planted the first blue flag at the canal edge, and whispered, "Fine." One step. She followed the compass east toward the old tree line. The fog made distance strange. Every few yards she planted another flag, blue cloth snapping lightly in the damp air. Behind her, the flags formed a thin trail back to the truck. Ahead, nothing but gray. She hated this. Routes should reveal themselves. Roads should hold still. God, in her opinion, should respect people who liked plans. Her phone buzzed once, then lost signal again. Her daughter, Maris, had called 3 times. Eleanor loved Maris deeply and resented the tone she used when concern became management. The last message played before signal died. "Mom, I know Uncle Calvin asked you to do this, but you don't have to prove anything to a dead man." Eleanor looked toward the fog. "I am not proving anything," she said to no one. Then, after a pause, "I am disproving several accusations." That was the second teaching from Joshua. God's step by step. Leading often begins by exposing the fear beneath our excuses. When Joshua sent spies into Jericho, the issue was not merely military information. It revealed what fear and faith were doing in the land. The people inside Jericho had heard what God had done and were melting in fear. Rahab, of all people, recognized the Lord's hand when others only calculated danger. Eleanor had called the orchard impractical, overgrown, too much trouble, and not worth saving. Some of that was true, but under those excuses lived fear. Fear of remembering her father's disappointment, fear of Calvin's last years, fear that selling quickly would be betrayal, fear that keeping anything would chain her to old pain, fear that God might ask for a step she could not turn into a schedule. She reached the first row of peach trees, or what remained of them. Twisted trunks, wild shoots, dead limbs, a few stubborn branches holding small hard green fruit. Though no one had pruned them in years, Eleanor touched one branch. "You should not still be trying," she said. The branch said nothing, which was wise. A sound came from the fog, metal against wood. Eleanor froze. Eleanor froze. Hello, silence. Then another knock. She gripped the compass like a weapon, which was ridiculous unless the attacker feared navigation. A man's voice called, "If you're a trespasser, you picked a depressing place." Eleanor exhaled. "If you're a murderer, you picked poor visibility." A figure emerged between the trees, tall, thin, wearing a brown work coat, carrying a hammer and a bundle of wooden stakes. His beard was mostly gray. His boots were muddy. His face looked familiar in the way small-town faces do when memory refuses to file them properly. "Eleanor Pike?" he asked. "It depends who wants to know." "Silas Boone." She knew the name before she knew the man. Boone, the neighboring farm. Old dispute, fence line argument. Her father had stopped speaking to Silas's father over 6 feet of drainage ditch and the kind of pride that can outlive crops. "You're on Pike land," Eleanor said. Silas looked around. "That remains historically controversial. I have a map. So did your father." That was part of the problem. The old irritation rose in her, inherited and ready. "I'm walking the boundary. I figured. Calvin told me you would." Eleanor stiffened. "You talked to Calvin every Thursday for the last year." That hit harder than expected. Calvin, who barely answered her calls, had met weekly with a Boone. Silas lifted the stakes. "He asked me to replace the broken markers if you ever came. He had a lot of nerve-making plans after death. He had practiced making trouble while alive." Eleanor almost smiled. Almost. That was the third teaching from Joshua. God may use unexpected people on the path before he explains why they are part of the promise. Rahab was not the ally Israel might have expected. She was a Canaanite woman in Jericho with a complicated life and a courageous faith. Yet God placed her in the story of deliverance. Joshua teaches that divine leading often includes people we would not have chosen because our assumptions are smaller than God's mercy. Eleanor would not have chosen Silas Boone. Their families had turned land into a courtroom for decades, but here he stood with stakes Calvin had requested, ready to mark a boundary both families had blurred through pride. Silas pointed through the fog. The old northeast corner is this way, if you want the truth more than the family version. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. That sentence has teeth. Most old boundaries do. She wanted to refuse his help. She also did not know where she was. Humility often begins when the map embarrasses you. Lead, she said. Silas walked slowly ahead, tapping the ground with one stake where the soil dipped. Eleanor followed, planting blue flags behind them. After several minutes, they reached a pile of stones nearly hidden under vines. Silas knelt and pulled away wet leaves. Beneath them sat an old iron pin. Corner marker, he said. Eleanor checked the map. He was right. Worse, he was right in a way that meant her father had been partly wrong. The disputed ditch was not fully Pike land. It never had been. The old anger in Eleanor shifted, confused by evidence. My father swore this corner was farther north. My father swore a lot of things too. Silas drove a fresh stake beside the stones. Calvin wanted this marked before the land changed hands. Why? Silas looked at her. Because he said some promises rot when truth stays buried. That was the fourth teaching from Joshua. God leads step by making his people mark what he has shown them, so memory becomes obedience instead of nostalgia. When Israel crossed the Jordan, God commanded them to take stones from the riverbed and set them up as a memorial. The stones were not decoration, they were testimony. When children asked what they meant, the people were to tell how the Lord cut off the waters and brought them through. Eleanor looked at the old stones at the boundary. Her family had not used stones as testimony. They had used them as evidence in old arguments. But Joshua's stones asked a different question, not who was right enough to win, but what has God done and what must we remember truthfully? Silas handed her a smaller stone from the pile. Calvin said you'd want one. Calvin did not know what I want. He said you would say that too. Eleanor took the stone, annoyed by how accurately the dead can sometimes remain aggravating. It fit in her palm, cold and rough. She slipped it into her coat pocket beside the Bible. The weight steadied her. The fog began to thin. A faint line of trees appeared ahead, then the shape of the old packing shed. The shed had leaned for as long as Eleanor could remember, a grey wooden building where peaches were once sorted, boxed, and loaded onto trucks. As children, she and Calvin had played there until their father caught them throwing bruised peaches at each other and delivered a lecture so long the fruit flies lost interest. Now the door hung crooked. A rusted scale sat inside. Dust covered the sorting table. On the wall, barely visible, someone had written in pencil, "First basket, June." Eleanor touched the words, her mother's handwriting. She had died when Eleanor was 20-1. The orchard became harder after that. Their father grew sharp. Calvin grew restless. Eleanor grew responsible. Everyone grew lonely in separate rooms. That was the fifth teaching from Joshua. Before God leads you into new obedience, he often calls you to consecration, because the next step is not just about location, but about the heart, walking into it. Before Jericho, before conquest, before new battles, Israel was called to renew covenant identity. They were circumcised at Gilgal, Passover was celebrated, and the manna stopped. The people had to remember who they were before they moved further into what God promised. Eleanor had wanted to treat the orchard as property, not covenant ground. But standing in the packing shed, touching her mother's pencil mark, she sensed that the next step could not be merely legal. She needed to ask what had claimed her heart. Resentment, efficiency, control, the need to be the child who did not cause trouble, the pride of being right because she had been responsible. These were not boundary issues. These were heart issues. Silas stood at the doorway, giving her privacy without leaving. "Your mother used to bring peach pies to my mother," he said. Eleanor turned. "Before the ditch war, before men improved everything," she laughed once. Hebrozev. In a corner of the shed sat an old wooden crate stamped with the Pike Orchard name. Inside were folded burlap sacks, a broken pruning knife, and a small tin box. Eleanor opened it. Photographs. Her mother by a truck. Her father, young and smiling before bitterness found his jaw. Calvin at 12, holding a peach in each hand like trophies. And one photograph that made Eleanor stop breathing, her father and Silas's father standing together by the irrigation canal, arms around each other, both laughing. On the back, in her mother's writing, "Before Pride." Eleanor's eyes burned. Silas looked at the photograph over her shoulder. He said nothing. Good. Some pictures preach better without commentary. That was the 6th teaching from Joshua. God may stop the old supply before you feel ready, because he is teaching you to live from his presence, not from yesterday's survival pattern. In Joshua, the manna ceased after the people ate from the produce of the land. The miracle that sustained them in the wilderness ended because a new season had begun. Eleanor's manna had been responsibility, as long as she was the practical one, the dependable one, the postal carrier who knew the route, the sister who handled papers, the daughter who stayed composed. She did not have to admit need. But God does not let wilderness provisions become idols. There comes a time when the thing that helped you survive cannot lead you into what comes next. Eleanor held the old photograph. Responsibility had kept her alive after her mother died. It had also kept her from tenderness. It had fed her in the wilderness and starved her in the orchard. Silas said quietly, "Calvin cried when he found that." Calvin cried, often near the end. Eleanor looked away. She had not known, or had not wanted to. Her phone suddenly caught signal. Messages flooded in. "Maris again. Please call me. I am serious." Eleanor called. Her daughter answered with the fury of love made anxious. "Where are you?" "In the packing shed." "Are you lost?" "Less than before." That is not an answer. It may be the most honest one I have. Maris inhaled sharply. "Mom, I can come." Eleanor almost said no. She had trained Maris to see her as unneeding. That training now felt like bad theology. "Come to the old orchard gate," Eleanor said. "Wear boots." Silence. "You want me there?" "Yes." Maris's voice softened. "I'm coming." That was the 7th teaching from Joshua. God leads his people as a people, not as isolated heroes proving they need no one. Joshua did not cross the Jordan alone. Priests stepped into the water carrying the ark. Tribes moved together. Leaders listened. Families followed. Warriors fought. The promise was communal. Even when one person had courage, the path involved the whole people of God. Eleanor had made solitude sound noble. "I don't want to bother anyone. I can handle it. No need to come." But sometimes independence is fear wearing work boots. God's step by step leading often includes inviting others into the walk, not because you are weak in the wrong way, but because covenant life is not meant to be crossed alone. While they waited for Maris, Silas repaired the packing shed door enough that it no longer groaned like a dying animal. Eleanor sorted through the tin box. She found another note from Calvin, folded inside a photograph of the 2 siblings as children sitting in the peach truck. "Ellie," it read, using the name only he had called her. "If you made it this far, you are probably mad." Good. Mad means you are not numb. I wanted you to see the northeast marker, the shed, and the old canal before you sell. I also wanted you to know I was wrong about some things. I let Dad's bitterness become mine. Then I let yours become proof I did not need to apologize. I am sorry. I made peace with Silas because somebody had to stop feeding ghosts. Don't sell the orchard just to avoid hearing it speak. Eleanor sat down on the crate. The letter blurred. Silas pretended to examine the door latch with unnecessary focus. Calvin had apologized after death because life had not given him enough courage before it ran out. She wanted to be angry at the timing. She was. She also wanted to hold the letter against her chest. She did. That was the 8th teaching from Joshua. God's leading requires courage, not only to face enemies ahead, but to face buried disobedience inside the camp. The story of Achan is terrible because it shows how hidden sin damages more than the person hiding it. Israel could not move forward while devoted things were concealed. Eleanor's family had hidden pride, silence, resentment, half-truths, and inherited bitterness in the camp for decades. They had blamed the weather, the economy, the boons, the orchard, the past, but hidden things had shaped every step. God does not lead us forward by pretending buried disobedience is harmless. He brings it into the light so the journey can continue clean. Eleanor whispered, "I should have called him more." Silas said, "Maybe." She looked up. He did not soften it. "Maybe he should have called you more too." That truth felt merciful because it did not flatter anyone. Outside, a horn sounded near the orchard gate. Maris arrived wearing yellow boots, a rain jacket, and the expression of a daughter prepared to rescue and scold simultaneously. She hugged Eleanor too hard. "You scared me. I scared myself first, if that helps." "It does not." Maris looked at Silas. "Who are you?" "An ancestral complication," Eleanor said. "This is Silas Boone." Maris's eyebrows rose. "The ditch people?" Silas nodded. "We prefer neighboring family with drainage history." Maris looked at her mother. "This day keeps getting worse." "Actually," Eleanor said, "it may be getting truthful." The three of them walked toward the canal. The fog had lifted enough to reveal the old irrigation path, clogged with weeds and fallen limbs. Without water, the orchard had slowly weakened. The canal did not need a miracle sea crossing. It needed clearing, stone by stone, root by root, one muddy section at a time. Eleanor stopped at the bank. Father once stood there shouting at Silas's father. She could almost hear him. She could almost hear himself agreeing, years later, because inherited anger often sounds like loyalty. Maris picked up a fallen branch and tossed it aside. Could this ever run again? Silas looked along the ditch. "With work." Eleanor said, "Everything with work sounds suspicious." Maris smiled. "That is because you like completed tasks, not processes." That was the 9th teaching from Joshua. God often brings down walls through repeated obedience that looks foolish before it looks powerful. Jericho did not fall because Israel invented a clever siege. They marched, once a day, in silence, around walls that did not move, then again, then again, then on the final day, again and again, until the shout came and God brought down what human strength could not. Eleanor wanted one dramatic answer. Sell or keep, forgive or not, restore or leave, call or avoid. But God was showing her a march, one marker, one conversation, one apology, one cleared branch, one remembered stone, one honest letter, one daughter invited, one enemy-turned helper, one step around a wall pride had built. Most obedience feels unimpressive while it is happening. Walls rarely tremble on the first lap. Maris said, "Mom, what are you thinking?" Eleanor looked at the canal. "That I do not know yet." Maris smiled faintly. "That may be spiritual growth. Do not become smug. It is unattractive in yellow boots. If this story is speaking to a place where you want God to show the whole road before you take the next step, pause right here. Like this video, subscribe, and write in the comments, "One step with God." Let that be your confession today. I may not see the whole path, but I will obey the next step. He has made clear. They spent the afternoon clearing only 20 feet of the canal. Not impressive, not enough to save the orchard, but enough to see water pooled beneath a blockage of leaves and clay. Silas dug with a shovel. Maris pulled roots. Eleanor moved stones into a pile near the bank. Her knees complained. Her back threatened legal action. At one point, she slipped and sat directly in mud. Maris gasped, then started laughing so hard she had to lean on the shovel. Eleanor wanted dignity. Dignity was unavailable. She laughed too. Silas said, "The Pike family has officially entered the land." Eleanor threw a small clod of mud at him and missed, proving either age or sanctification. By late afternoon, a thin stream of water moved through the cleared section. It was not much, a silver thread, but it moved. Eleanor watched it pass around a stone and continue downhill toward the first row of trees. Something inside her did the same. That was the 10th teaching from Joshua. God, step by step, leading often asks you to act before the full provision is visible. When the priests carrying the ark stepped into the Jordan, the waters were cut off, but they had to step toward flood stage water first. Faith is not pretending the river is dry. Faith is trusting God enough to put obedient feet where He is commanded. Eleanor had wanted dry ground before movement, certainty before surrender, healing before conversation, desire before obedience. But Joshua shows that sometimes the ground opens under the foot that steps. Not before, under. She looked at the trickle of water. It still might not be enough. Silas leaned on the shovel. Enough for what? She almost said, to save the orchard. Instead, she said, enough for today. Morris nodded. That sounds like the Bible. Do not overreact. Evening approached. They walked back toward the packing shed, muddy, tired, and quieter than before. Near the old well, Eleanor noticed a depression in the grass. She pushed aside weeds and found flat stones arranged in a circle. Memories returned. Summer evenings, her mother laughing, Calvin burning marshmallows into black torches, their father playing harmonica before bitterness made music seem unserious. Eleanor knelt and picked up one of the stones. This one was smooth, pale, almost white. She placed it beside the boundary stone in her pocket. Maris watched. What are you doing? Collecting evidence. For what? That the past was not only pain. That was the 11th teaching from Joshua. God leads us by teaching us to remember rightly, because false memory can keep us wandering even when the path is open. Israel had to remember deliverance, covenant, warning, judgment, mercy, provision, and promise. Memory in Joshua is not sentimental, it is moral. It tells the truth. So future obedience has roots. Eleanor had remembered the orchard mainly as conflict after her mother died, but that was not the whole truth. There had been laughter, fruit, pies cooling on windowsills, Calvin singing badly from trees, her father before hardness, her mother writing first basket, June, the old fire ring, the photograph before pride. If she remembered only the wound, she would sell from bitterness. If she remembered only the wound, she would sell from bitterness. If she remembered only sweetness, she would keep from fantasy. God was leading her toward truthful memory, and truthful memory was harder than either resentment or nostalgia. Silas locked the shed with a temporary latch. You coming back tomorrow? He asked. Eleanor looked at Morris. Morris looked at her boots. I can come after work. Eleanor looked down the blue flags marking the path back through the field. Step by step, they had made a visible way where morning fog had hidden everything. Yes, she said. Tomorrow, Silas nodded. I'll bring better tools. And fewer ancestral complications, Morris asked. No promises, he said. That night, Eleanor went home with mud on her clothes, stones in her pocket, Calvin's letter in her purse, and questions still unresolved. She did not call the developer. She did not decide to keep the orchard either. This irritated her. She liked decisions to line up like mailboxes. Instead, she made soup, showered, and opened Joshua again at the kitchen table. The bowed. Her late husband Frank's chair sat empty by the window. Frank had never cared for the orchard. Too many ghosts, he used to say, and not enough peaches. Deeprith told her to sleep before making any vows, which was one of the reasons she missed him. She read about the commander of the Lord's army meeting Joshua near Jericho. Joshua asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The answer was, "Neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Eleanor sat back. Neither. That was the 12th teaching from Joshua. God's leading is not about getting him to join your side. It is about surrendering to his command. Eleanor had spent years asking God, silently, to validate her side of the Pike story. Bless my version. Confirm my grievance. Prove I was the responsible one. Show that Calvin was wrong. Show that Dad wounded us. Show that the Boons took what was ours. Show that selling is wise. Show that keeping is faithful. But the commander before Jericho did not come to flatter Joshua's categories. The holy question was not, is God on my side? The holy question was, am I on the Lord's side? Eleanor took the 2 stones from her pocket and placed them on the table. Boundary stone and firing stone. Truth and memory. Correction and mercy. She bowed her head. Lord, I do not want you to baptize my stubbornness and call it guidance. The prayer was so honest, it startled her. She wrote it down on a notepad before she could improve it into something less useful. Then she called Maris. I'm sorry I trained you to worry from a distance instead of help up close. Silence. Then Maris said, that is oddly specific. I am practicing repentance before I lose courage. I forgive you. Eleanor closed her eyes. Thank you, Maris said. I'm sorry I sometimes manage you like a project. You come by it genetically. Unfortunately, they laughed softly. The orchard was already bearing fruit, though not the kind a buyer could appraise. The next weeks did not become simple. They became guided. Theo, Marius, and Silas walked the rest of the boundary band. They found 3 markers, 1 collapsed fence, 2 places where the map was wrong, and 1 section where the Boone farm had been using pike land for grazing because nobody alive remembered the original line. Silas offered to pay. Eleanor almost accepted too quickly, then paused. Let us fix the canal first, she said, then settle the paper. Silas looked at her. That sounds dangerously gracious. I am experimenting. Calvin's old truck became their tool shed. Maris brought her husband on Saturdays. He knew irrigation pumps and had the calm temperament of a man who had learned not to speak during mother-daughter tension unless invited by heaven. People from church came once. They heard Eleanor was working on the old orchard, which is how small towns describe both agriculture and spiritual intervention. Mrs. Fay brought sandwiches. A widower named Leonard repaired the shed roof. 2 teenagers cleared vines while complaining with impressive stamina. Someone painted the old Pike Orchard sign without asking, misspelling orchard at first, then correcting it before Eleanor saw, which everyone agreed was mercy. The developer called again. Eleanor did not answer. Then she called back and said she needed time. How much? He asked. She looked out the window at the 2 stones on her sill, enough to obey the next step. He did not know what to do with that, which made 2 of them. That was the 13th teaching from Joshua. God leads step by step until obedience becomes a choice of covenant, not just a reaction to crisis. At the end of Joshua, after battles, allotments, failures, victories, burials, promises, warnings, and mercy, Joshua stood before the people and said, choose this day whom you will serve. Step by step leading does not remove the need for decision. It prepares the heart to choose rightly. Eleanor eventually chose not to sell the orchard to the storage company, not because keeping it was practical. It was not because she suddenly became sentimental. She remained allergic to nonsense, not because every tree would live. Many would not. She chose because God had led her through enough steps to show that the orchard was no longer merely land. It was a place where truth had been marked, pride confronted, memory healed, neighbors reconciled, family restored, and obedience made visible. She did not keep it as a museum to the Pike name. She reopened it as a small community orchard with leased rows, church workdays, a farm stand for local families, and a sign near the entrance that read, ask what these stones mean. Under the sign sat a small pile of stones, 1 from the boundary, 1 from the fire ring, 1 from the canal, 1 from the shed, foundation, 1 from the old gate, and 1 Maris added from her own garden because she said inherited healing should have branches. If this message is helping you see that God may already be leading you through the step you keep dismissing as too small, do not ignore it. Subscribe, stay with us for more biblical wisdom, and write in the comments, God leads step by step. Let that be your reminder every time fear demands the whole map before you obey. The Lord may not show you the whole road today, but He is faithful in the next step. On the first harvest weekend, the orchard did not look impressive enough for a magazine. Half the trees were still wild. The canal ran, but unevenly. The shed smelled of fresh paint and old mice, a combination nobody had requested. The sign leaned slightly. The farm stand table wobbled unless supported by a folded church bulletin, which Eleanor considered the bulletin's highest calling. But children came, families came. Mrs. Fay sold peach hand pies that nearly caused a theological revival. Silas brought jars of honey from the Boone farm. Maris managed the cash box with terrifying efficiency. Eleanor stood near the stone pile, watching people ask about it. A boy pointed. "Why are those rocks there?" Eleanor smiled. There it was. Joshua's question. She knelt carefully. Because God brought us through some things we needed to remember. Like what? The boggy field. An old fight. A family apology. A step we did not understand until after we took it. The boy frowned. That's a lot for rocks. Stones are stronger than paper. He accepted this and ran toward the ham pies. Later, Silas found Eleanor by the first row of recovering trees. "Calvin would like this," he said. Eleanor looked at the branches, some pruned, some stubborn, some bearing fruit, scarred by weather. He would pretend not to. "Yes." Then he would tell me the sign is crooked. Also yes. Eleanor smiled. "I miss him differently now." Silas nodded. "That is a kind of healing." She looked across the orchard toward the canal, where water moved in a thin, bright line. Not much. Enough. Maris came over carrying a box of peaches. "Mom, the developer sent another email." Eleanor sighed. "On harvest day, some walls march around themselves." "What did he say?" "Higher offer." Eleanor took one peach from the box. It was small, fragrant, warm from the sun. For a moment, the old practical voice returned. Money, security, simplicity, no mud, no responsibility, no future arguments about irrigation. Then she looked at the stones, at Maris, at Silas, at the children by the stand, at the canal, at the shed where her mother's handwriting had been preserved behind glass, at the old route she had once wanted to avoid, and the new path got opened, one step at a time. "Tell him no," Eleanor said. Maris smiled. "Just no?" Eleanor looked at the crooked sign. "Tell him the land is already under contract." Maris blinked. "With whom?" Eleanor took a bite of peach. It was tart, imperfect, alive, with obedience. Maris laughed. "That is not legally binding. It is stronger than it looks. If you are standing at the edge of your own Jordan, your own foggy field, your own impossible wall, your own old family wound, your own dry canal, despise the next small step God has placed in front of you. Open the scripture, plant the flag, tell the truth, ask for help, mark the stone, clear the first branch, make the call, apologize before pride hardens again. Stop asking God to join your side and surrender to His. And when He gives enough light for one step, take it. Not because you see the whole promised land, because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Subscribe if you want to keep walking through Scripture with us, and write in the comments, "I will take the next step." Let that be your prayer today, not loud, not polished, but real. "Lord, I will not wait for the whole map before I obey you in the step you have shown me." That evening, after the farm stand closed, Eleanor walked alone to the canal. The sunset turned the water copper. Crickets began their thin music in the weeds. Her boots sank slightly in the same red clay that had trapped her that first morning. But now she did not curse the mud. Not loudly, at least. She carried Calvin's Bible under her arm and the compass in her pocket. At the canal bank, she opened to Joshua chapter 4 and read about the stones again. Then she read Joshua chapter 1, "Be strong and courageous." The words felt different now, not easier, deeper. Courage was not a mood, it was a step taken under the promise of God's presence. She thought of Joshua at the Jordan, priests stepping into water, stones lifted from the riverbed, Jericho walls still standing until the final obedient lap, hidden sin exposed, battles fought, land allotted, choices made, graves dug, promises kept, step by step. Not because Israel was strong, because God was faithful. Eleanor took the compass out and opened it. The needle settled north. For years, she had trusted roots because roots made her feel safe. Now she was learning to trust the God who could lead when roots ended. She closed the compass and whispered, "Thank you for not giving me the whole map." That was a sentence she never expected to pray. Across the orchard, lights glowed in the packing shed where Maris was counting cash. Silas was stacking crates, and someone was probably misusing a broom. Eleanor turned back toward them. The blue flags from that first day were still tied near the path, faded now, fluttering in the evening breeze. She had meant to remove them. Instead, she left them. They marked the way God had led her when she could not see more than a few feet ahead. Someday, they would fray and fall. The stones would remain longer, the story longer still, if they told it. And maybe that was how God leads his people most often. Not by dropping a finished map from heaven, but by giving his presence, his word, his people, his correction, his memorial stones, his strange timing, his enough for today, water, and one clear command at a time. Eleanor walked back through the orchard, step, then another, then another. The path was not fully lit, but it was no longer empty. And somewhere between the old boundary stone and the running canal, between Calvin's apology and Maris's yellow boots, between Silas Boone's repaired stakes and the crooked sign at the gate, Eleanor Pike finally understood God does not always show you the whole promised land at once. Sometimes he simply says, put your foot here, then here, then here, and when you look back, the steps you feared were random have become a road only he could have made.